spells, and it will be dry with light winds, and most will see some sunny spells at times. The northeast of England will also have a rather cloudy start to the day with an isolated light shower possible, mainly over the hills, and there will be some sunny spells possible too. Southern Scotland will have a cloudy start to Monday with the cloud thick enough at times for a little light rain or drizzle, especially in the west, brightest in the east. And Northern Ireland will also start Monday on a cloudy note with the odd light shower possible here. So remaining cloudier with scattered showers in the northwest while mostly dry elsewhere with warm sunny spells, especially in the south. And that is how your Monday morning forecast is shaping up.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today we'll be exploring the biggest stories from Westminster, looking ahead to those fireworks over the protocol we're expecting later today. We'll be talking about energy security and the latest in Ukraine. All that to come after your morning headlines.
A very good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The government's going to unveil changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol later. It's going to include the ability for ministers to unilaterally override the current agreement. The new legislation will include relaxing checks on goods arriving in Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. But Ireland's Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said the measures marked a low point in the UK's approach to Brexit. Well, the Prime Minister is going to launch the UK's new post-Brexit food strategy today, which he says will back British farmers and create more jobs. Well, the measures aim to strengthen supply chains and increase domestic food production. But a leaked draft version of the plan's already been heavily criticised. The co-founder of the restaurant chain Leon, Henry Dimbleby, led a major review of the country's food industry and says the new plans aren't detailed enough to be called a strategy. Government plans to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda is to face two separate legal challenges in the courts today. 31 people had been expected to make the flight tomorrow, with the Home Office planning to schedule more later this year. Well, on Friday, a High Court judge ruled that these flights could go ahead. Both of those legal challenges will take place today. The UK economy fell by 0.3% in April, according to official figures. It means UK gross domestic product is now less than 1% above its pre-pandemic level. The Chancellor says he's fully focused on growing the economy. A man who was left paralysed from the waist down after being seriously injured in the Manchester Arena bombing has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in a wheelchair. He's raised almost £500,000 for the Spinal Injuries Association. It's 45-year-old Martin Hibbert, who made the climb with the nurse physio who helped him recover from the bombing in 2017. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your DAB radio. Now, first of all today, I think it's important to note that GDP has fallen for the second month running. Figures released by the ONS show that services, production and construction in all of those industries are shrinking. They were shrinking in April. And this has produced some fears of a technical recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Although perhaps there's a silver lining to this dark cloud. The figures aren't rosy today, but interestingly, the UK economy was still growing in April if you exclude NHS Test and Trace and the vaccine programme, which of course were both winding down for obvious reasons. There's a lot more to explore in what's going on in our economy and the options for growth, so be sure to stick with us tomorrow morning when we have a more in-depth look at this issue. But moving on, the family of a British man condemned to die by a Russian proxy court in Ukraine say they are devastated and saddened. The trial took place in the unrecognised, self-declared Donetsk People's Republic and has widely been described as illegal. Ukraine resident Mr. Sean Pinner, 48, from Bedfordshire originally, was captured in April while defending the city of Mariupol and was sentenced on Friday alongside fellow Brit Aidan Aslin. Well, let's talk now to Keir Giles, an expert on security issues affecting Russia and on the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Of course, a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House. Morning, Keir. Thanks for joining us. I suppose this is a very desperate situation. The people involved have been calling for British government intervention, and it looks like the Russians are trying to leverage this position for a prisoner swap. What are the dynamics at play here?
Well, it's absolutely right. It is desperate, but the sad thing about it is that none of this is surprising. Sean Pinner and Aidan Aslin will have known perfectly well when they surrendered in Mariupol that they had little chance of escaping without potential torture and murder, but the alternative, of course, was certain death among the defenders of Azovstal. And yes, it's not surprising that Russia will attempt to leverage this in any way that it can, because Russia itself is in a desperate position and is clutching at straws to try to alleviate its own situation. And of course, this is only a small part of that process. Think of the much larger scale at which Russia is blackmailing the rest of the world, like withholding food supplies from Ukraine to feed tens of millions of people across Asia and Africa. And even these 2 British citizens and Ukrainian citizens as well, and servicemen in the Ukrainian military, are just a small part of the much bigger picture, where so many other defenders of Mariupol have disappeared into this Stalinist system of repression that Russia is re-establishing. They're the people we feel most directly and strongly for here in the UK, but they're just one among hundreds and thousands of people in similar situations.
Yes, it's clearly a very, very desperate situation. I wonder if the desperacity, if that's a word, if the desperation of the Russian Federation comes from their lack of success, the stalemate, in effect, in how they have been able to take only parts of the east and south of the country. I mean, Russia's not doing well in this war.
Well, let's not forget that it is a fair chunk of Ukraine that they already have control of, and also that it's not necessarily on the battlefield that this war is going to be determined, because Russia still has this stranglehold on the Ukrainian economy, and it can grind its way forward simply through mass, through pushing so many untrained troops and so much artillery firepower into the conflict that they can continue to inch Ukraine backwards. And of course, then it's a trial of stamina and of patience. And it's the West, the backers of Ukraine in the West, that need to keep up the fighting, keep Ukraine going, not only in terms of weapons supplies to keep it fighting, but also to keep it going as a functional state and a functional economy. And that's where compassion fatigue in the West is probably the biggest threat that Ukraine faces at the moment.
It look like we've got much compassion fatigue in the United Kingdom or indeed in the United States. However, we are starting to see some voices in the European Union who are talking more about the damaging effects of sanctions on domestic economies, not just Russia. Of course, sanctions work both ways. Is there a risk that the West has less stamina for the long haul than Russia does? Being an autocracy, it's very easy to set a direction of travel and stick to it, whereas democracies tend to be a little bit more messy in this aspect.
That's exactly right. For countries like the UK, the direction is clear, and what we need to do to support Ukraine is clear. But then we have to drag along the flakier members of the EU, for example, with us. And they have always been focused on the fact that this war in Ukraine actually gets in the way of their comfortable life and making a profit. And they've been unwilling to take on the costs not only of economic support to Ukraine, not only of imposing sanctions, but also of actually delivering that military support that Ukraine needs. And that's a problem that has been bad, but is only going to get worse. So preserving that Western unity, which is that additional challenge to supporting Ukraine, has to be one of the biggest priorities for Ukraine in gathering its supporters to continue this war.
Interesting, this war has been going on for quite some time now. And what makes the news versus what doesn't seem to be sort of the novel aspects of this war? We know people have been dying every day. We know that the fighting has been intense, but it's the capture and the sentencing of these two Brits that has really brought this back to the forefront of the news, that then again makes us think about what has been going on pretty relentlessly for the last few months. How many more Brits is the estimate that are fighting out there in Ukraine? Might there be more Brits captured? Have there been people who are either living there to start with, as these people were, or indeed who have gone out to fight against the advice of the British government, it has to be said, but gone out to fight, as we know some have? Do we have any idea of the numbers involved?
It's possible. I don't know those figures, but let's not forget it's not only people fighting on the front lines, but also people who are putting themselves in harm's way for Ukraine, and thus for the defense of Europe, who are not actually in uniform. The aid workers, the humanitarian workers, the people who are trying to keep Ukraine's economy going, all of them, if they are close to an area that is under threat by Russia, are at risk themselves. And whether or not they're actually signed up as Ukrainian servicemen, they could fall into exactly the same situation we're seeing here. It is an act of bravery to go and support Ukraine in whichever way, in an area that is within reach of Russia.
No, it's certainly very, very brave, although, of course, against the advice of the British government. I suppose, just finally in this conversation, that very much limits what the British government can do here. We're not expecting some sort of prisoner swap. We're not expecting the United Kingdom to want to give Russia something in exchange for these prisoners.
I've not seen anything that indicates exactly what the British government is planning to do in response, other than obviously protest. This is something which you can't measure against any known standards of morality or justice. This is a simple, straightforward act of terrorism and of blackmail against the West. How the British government responds is going to be determined, of course, by the way the British government has responded to terrorists in the past.
Well, Keir Giles, thank you so much for talking us through that rather unchirpy situation, although slightly lightened by the chirping birds in the background of what I presume to be your garden. It's good to have the light in the shade there. Keir Giles, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Well, moving on, because of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine has domestic consequences as well. It's turned the spotlight once again on the UK's energy supply and the merits of domestic resources and security. With spiralling energy bills and a once-in-a-generation cost of living crisis, as well as rising diplomatic aggression with the East, perhaps now more than ever, energy security has come to the forefront of political debate. Charles McAllister, the Director of Policy for the UK Onshore Oil and Gas Group, puts it like this. If the UK really wants secure, clean and affordable British energy for the long term, as highlighted in the Energy Security Strategy, then much greater weight needs to be attached to the evident economic, environmental and geopolitical merits of onshore oil and gas production in the UK, or we will continue to drift deeper into dependence on foreign sources. Well, do we need a greater domestic supply of energy? Joining me now is Angela Knight, former Treasury Minister and former head of Energy UK. Welcome to the programme, Angela. Really good to have you. I suppose, first of all, there is a growing political consensus that we need greater domestic production, that we need greater security. But there doesn't seem to be a consensus on how we get there. What's the lay of the land?
Yes, you're absolutely right about the fact that there's a consensus, and there still seems to be a continuing debate from where we are now to where we need to get to. So let me sort of try and perhaps paint you a picture which I hope gives a little bit more clarity. The first is the energy security point. Can we get more gas and oil, both out of the North Sea as well as on land, in an environmentally friendly way? And I suspect that, well, the answer to that question is out of the North Sea, the answer is yes. On land, well, this is rather more contentious. And so what we should be doing right now is a full-scale fracking trial, which is done very carefully with environmental controls around it, with scientists there and all that sort of proper controlled trial basis to determine properly whether it is feasible or not, and whether the environmental consequences are acceptable or not. And we have to do that because gas is the transition fuel, if you like, for both our heating and indeed our electricity production, transition from where we are now to a future where we have more renewables, but we also have more nuclear power. So more out of the gas sea right now, do the fracking trial right now, get the small-scale nuclear program underway. I don't mean these huge, great nuclear reactors. I mean the ones that, for example, Rolls-Royce can produce, where you literally can do one of these or build one of these in 18 months, 2 years, and at a cost of about 2 billion, which means that it's investable and not just has to be paid for by the taxpayer. But also right now, get into the detail, what I call the algorithm of the electricity pool, which is the arrangement of how much that wholesale price of electricity costs. Because when it was put together many years ago, the assumption was the most expensive would be wind. Right now, the most expensive is gas. But the majority of the pool, more or less, or certainly 50%, sometimes 60%, is produced by generators who are cheaper than gas, and nuclear being particularly cheap at the moment, but they're cheaper than gas, and yet the price is being pulled up by the high price of gas. I know I've got a bit complicated in describing it, but what I'm saying is get into the maths of how we price wholesale electricity, and that will be helpful, significantly helpful, not just for us as domestic consumers, but most importantly for industry, who's the biggest user of electricity and is in danger of being priced out of the international markets because of that cost. So a lot of things.
I suppose it shows how interconnected it all is. Back to gas for a moment, because we do import a huge quantity of gas from Qatar and from the United States, our two biggest suppliers there. The United States produces a huge quantity of shale gas. It's been fracking since the days of the early Obama presidency, if not a little bit beforehand. They've got millions of wells and indeed a lot of data with regards to the science of it, with regard to the safety of it. I know there's a review underway currently in the United Kingdom, but what you're suggesting with a big trial, is this not yet again a review upon a review upon a review? Aren't the facts on fracking pretty clear by now?
I'm not proposing a review upon review. You're not doing that. Could I just put your figures about right, though? Because something like 40% of our gas actually comes from Norway by pipeline. And then, of course, we're still putting 40-50% out of the North Sea. It's that balance which we ship in as LNG, liquefied natural gas. So it comes in these big tankers. And the question that you're saying is, can we replace what we currently get from Qatar and from the US by drilling more at home? In theory, the answer is yes. And I'm not in favour of review, but I am in favour of doing a trial. That is, we do a full-size drilling for commercial fracking, but we do it under scientific controls. And the reason for that is it is a very emotional subject. And whilst emotion should not override the practicalities, we all have to recognise that there are these emotional views. There have been big mistakes in the US, but these things happen. We don't have to follow the US mistakes. We have to follow where the US do it correctly. And they have much bigger areas of land than we do, which are largely uninhabited. We're a busy island. So getting the thing right, even if it might take us a couple of years to do that trial, is much better than just carrying on, because then I suspect we will find, or those who do it will find, that the objections just become very difficult to handle. And I do know that the government has, it has sort of opened the door, if you like, to the trial. So I say, get on with it.
It's so interesting how this conversation has shifted when the realities of high energy costs are laid to bear. People tend to be a little bit less opposed to greater domestic exploration and all sorts. But I suppose this is a conversation that will run and run. I look forward to seeing the results of that final review. Let's hope it's a final review into British natural shale gas and everything else. But for now, Angela Knight, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really interesting discussion there. Now, finally today, the Council of Europe has slammed the UK over a proposed plan to grant conditional immunity to people involved in the Irish Troubles. Most of the 3,500 killings during that period remain unsolved, leaving a backlog of so-called legacy cases that have fostered tensions in politics and policing in Northern Ireland ever since. But the Council of Europe, who oversee the European Court of Human Rights, accused the government of not consulting stakeholders, saying any legislation must comply with the European Convention of Human Rights and permit effective investigations into all outstanding cases. Well, the Prime Minister was asked about this moments ago, and let's take a little listen into what he was saying.
First of all, the protocol isn't actually even yet being implemented, and it's because it's all been put into cold storage while we try and manage it. Were it to be implemented, it would do even more damage, diverting trade, and that is upsetting the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. You've got a problem at the moment, which is that in Northern Ireland, the Stormont Assembly, the government of Northern Ireland, can't meet because of the effects of the protocol. What it does is it creates unnecessary barriers on trade east-west. What we can do is fix that. It's not a big deal. We can fix it in such a way as to remove those bureaucratic barriers, but without putting up barriers on trade moving north-south in the island of Ireland as well. That's what we want to do. And so in terms of the strategy, the overarching objective, the primary thing we got to do is make sure that we protect the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And that means respecting trade east-west between GB and NI, but also trade north-south between Northern Ireland.
So what would you say to those Conservative MPs who are thinking of voting against this, who think that you are potentially breaking international law and could spark a trade war?
I think our higher and our main international obligation is to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, to the peace process in Northern Ireland, getting that Stormont Assembly up and running again. Northern Ireland is fantastic, but it needs government. It needs, particularly now when people are facing pressures from the global cost of living problems with the energy price spikes, you need a government in Northern Ireland. You need Stormont up and running, so we've got a plan to fix it.
The Prime Minister there answering questions on the protocol. It's interesting how these issues of legacy, of peace and of protocol are all so intertwined. Well, let's discuss them all now with the Northern Irish journalist Amanda Ferguson. Thanks for joining us, Amanda. It's a pretty big day in Westminster because we're expecting to see this new legislation about overriding the protocol being laid down this afternoon. We'll get to see the details in just a few hours' time. But how are the communities in Northern Ireland anticipating what's going on today?
Well, the list of people who are supportive of what the UK government's about to do is a lot shorter than the list of people who are complaining about it. Certainly, there's a feeling that the action that the government's taken is to try to get the DUP back into devolved government. Now, unfortunately, the DUP have said already this morning that what is being announced isn't going to be enough for them to make a move. They want to see progress. They want to see if there are attempts made to adjust what the UK government is proposing. We know that the things that are on the table are likely to be the green channel for goods that are moving from Britain to Northern Ireland, the dual regulatory regime, so businesses choosing whether to follow the UK or the EU standard, then the role of the ECJ, the governance side of things, because the UK government doesn't want the ECJ to have a final say. And then, of course, I think that we'll hear about keeping Northern Ireland, allowing them to have the same tax breaks that would be applicable in the rest of the UK. So it essentially guts the protocol as it stands at the moment. What we've heard today so far, and you'll forgive me for looking down because there's been a lot of reaction so far, is that the PM saying that it's relatively trivial. Liz Truss saying it's about protecting peace and stability in Northern Ireland, whereas Maros Sefcovic has said unilateral action is damaging to mutual trust and a formula of uncertainty. And the Irish Government Minister Simon Coveney has said publishing legislation which would breach the UK's commitment to international law, and he said it would mark a particularly low point in the UK's approach to Brexit. Now, we know that businesses, depending on what sort of business you are, depends whether or not you actually like the protocol. People who are importers don't particularly like it because if they rely on GB distribution centres, then there's more friction for them. But certainly the majority of business leaders have said that they would prefer a negotiated outcome. If you look to what the CBI chief Tony Danker said, he said that the EU needs to move further, but that the UK also needs to build trust, and unilateral action doesn't do that.
Well, we are expecting some fireworks later on today in Parliament, of course, because the government maintained that they will not be breaking international law. They maintain this legislation works within the auspices of the protocol, Article 13.4, which allows superseding agreements, also that sort of working group situation as well. But the other side say that they will break international law. I suppose, do you think, Amanda Ferguson, we'll get an answer today as to whether or not the government will be breaking law in its move today?
Well, I think that the UK government has said that it's going to provide and publish a summary of the guidance that it's received, but not the full guidance. Now, if you talk to, for example, the Sinn Féin leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, described Brandon Lewis saying that what's going to be announced doesn't breach international law. She said that he was talking through his hat. The Alliance Party leader, Naomi Long, isn't particularly happy this morning with the UK government, with the Secretary of State, and also with the NIO. There's some pretty strong language being used this morning about the approach that the Alliance Party feels that the UK government side is taking. And essentially, Alliance and other parties have said that their fingerprints are not on this, that they want a negotiated outcome would be best for the people of Northern Ireland.
Well, I suppose it's not long to wait now. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme there. But Amanda Ferguson, thank you so much for joining and talking through these very complicated issues. Really good to get a clear understanding there. That's it for me today. Well, I'm back at 3 p.m. actually, but coming up now, it's To The Point with Mercy and Nana. But first, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking mostly dry with sunny spells, although some scattered showers will persist in the northwest. Let's take a look at the details. Well, the southwest of England will start Monday morning dry with some fair weather cloud and plenty of early sunny spells, and it will feel pleasantly warm in the sunshine with light winds. The southeast of England will start the morning with a fair amount of cloud, although there will still be sunny spells, remaining dry for all. It's a similar start for southwest Wales, rather cloudy but dry with some bright or sunny spells, and these will be most likely along the coast. To the Midlands, and they'll have a cloudier start to the day with only limited bright or sunny spells, and it will be dry with light winds, and most will see some sunny spells at times. The northeast of England will also have a rather cloudy start to the day with an isolated light shower possible, mainly over the hills, and there will be some sunny spells possible too. Southern Scotland will have a cloudy start to Monday with the cloud thick enough at times for a little light rain or drizzle, especially in the west, brightest in the east. And Northern Ireland will also start Monday on a cloudy note with the odd light shower possible here. So remaining cloudier with scattered showers in the northwest, while mostly dry elsewhere, with warm sunny spells, especially in the south. And that is how your Monday morning forecast is shaping up.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part